Paulie Malignaggi here, Paulie TV, and we're back for another episode. We're discussing a bunch of different stuff lately. We get interviews with various fighters, various people, different boxing topics. Like I said, I always tell you guys like, comment, and subscribe. But in the comments, sometimes, give me some topics that you want to hear me discuss. Hear me some, let me hear what your thoughts are. Write down what your thoughts are as far as, discussions we could have together, even on some of the live chats, things that you want to bring up or whatnot. I try to think of things that, would put people like you guys into the shoes of a fighter or in the career mode of a fighter, so to speak, sort of like the video games. I had obviously my own boxing career, and I can speak on my experiences, and I freely will tell you about the pros and the cons, the positives and the negatives, the good experiences and the bad experiences. I don't have a problem with that. I feel like all the experiences, whether they're good or bad, they're learning experiences, and they're also things that nobody should be ashamed of. And when they're bad and when they're good, they should be things that people should be proud of. So I have fun and I enjoy sharing things with you guys and sort of letting you guys get into the mind of a fighter, or the experience of a fighter when he's going through his career. So one of the things I was thinking about today is what when you're fighting for a title, or what do we define a title fight as? So for me, I'll get into it like this. When I turned pro, I was thinking about the major sanctioning body titles, the IBF, WBC, WBO, and WBA, and for me, my goal was to win a major sanctioning body world championship. Now, we didn't have the secondary world titles at the time. Within those sanctioning bodies, we had other sanctioning bodies. There was the WBU, I believe there was the IBA, IBO. There was lower level sanctioning bodies that were creating world championships. Listen, I think those are always going to be there, but we kind of knew already what the lower level sanctioning bodies were and what the high level sanctioning bodies were. So, for me, when I turned pro, as I said, my goal was to win a major world title in a major sanctioning body. And at the time, the major sanctioning bodies were just creating world championships. They weren't creating a primary world championship and a secondary world championship in the same weight class. So I don't know, if I was fighting in an era like that, I mean, what if my goals would start to be watered down? I feel like the guys that came before me probably look at my era as a little bit of a watered down era because, there was the four major sanctioning bodies, while in the 80s, up until the mid 80s anyway, you had two major sanctioning bodies, the WBC and the WBA, So maybe guys from that era look at my era and say, well, you got a couple of extra chances to win a world championship with a couple more major sanctioning bodies, and so I'm one of the guys that now in this era, I kind of get a little bit teed off and disgusted when I see a secondary championship like the WBC creating what is this, franchise champion and world champion. You see it at times. You don't see it in every weight class at least, but you see it at times. And it gets confusing as to which one is the main guy, I feel like they're starting to do this. These sanctioning bodies are starting to do this just so the fights don't have to happen, just so each side is happy with a belt that they get, and then they can just defend that belt, and both sides will sell said fighter as the world champion or as the major primary champion. And so, and all that does is create more confusion among fans. But within the sport, those fights now don't happen. You see, if only one of those guys was allowed to have a championship, then you would force that fight to eventually happen. But now you give each guy a title. That guy's team will sell their guy as the champion, and all of a sudden they'll start making marketing demands and even contract demands like, oh, no, I don't have to fight that guy because he doesn't bring this to the table. I've got my belt, so on and so forth. And all you do is prevent fights from happening this way. That's all you're doing. And boxing already has a tough enough time trying to, make fights happen, So I'm not crazy about that. WBA did this as well with the super title and the world championship. I remember when they first came out with the super title, I wasn't exactly happy about it, but I kind of understood the science behind it, or the mechanism, the mindset behind it. It was because these major champions were prevented from fighting big fights because they had to fight mandatories. And so in order to avoid that, when a fighter became a high level champion where he'd made 5 successful defenses, or he unified unified the title, his WBA title, with something else, the WBA would deem him a super champion, and he would not have to then fight the mandatories all the time. Instead, they would create a regular world champion that was below the super champion, and that guy would fight the mandatories instead, you know? And so I kind of got it, but I wasn't crazy about it, but I kind of got it. But at least in that instance, when you only saw a super champion in those special occasions, when the champion of the WBA would make 5 successful defenses, or he would unify the title with another major sanctioning body belt. This started to create some issues, though, because what if the guy who wins the secondary belt now unifies that secondary belt with an IBF or WBC or WBO title? You can't call him a super champion even though he's unified, because he was never the main champion, the super champion to begin with. You know, the one who's elevated above him would be the super champion. So it started to get confusing as it was, and I'm sure it started to get confusing even for the sanctioning body. So what ended up happening? They just started to create the super champion as the world champion. That's it. Now you see a super champion in every weight class. The super title even becomes vacant. There is no longer a special stipulation for the super champion. Yet, they did not get rid of the secondary world champion belt. So you have a super champion and you have a world champion in the WBA. The irony of this is that the actual world champion in the WBA is actually the super champion. And the guy claiming who's the world champion in the WBA is just a secondary belt holder that doesn't really mean anything. But, you know, they still get the term for that belt is the world champion. So you give guys a chance to start arguing with themselves about who should be deemed the primary world champion. And did you really accomplish your dream? Like, I noticed a lot of guys, right, when they win world championships, I can remember Floyd Mayweather doing this. Shoot, I even did this. You know, when you win a world championship, your first world championship, you just break down, you start crying. You know, it's like, it's your lifelong dream. You've just accomplished it. You don't see it every guy, but you know you see some very special emotional moments when people win their first world championship, their first major world championship. Now what happens? Is it the same special feeling if you're winning a secondary belt? I mean, are you convincing yourself of the lie? I don't know. You know, it's very, very. I'm not in this generation. I'm not fighting in this generation. I'm not sure that I would feel that way, because I have a hard time counting the secondary champions as the major world champions, you know? So in my time, there was the 4 major sanctioning body belts, and they were the 4 major world championships, and you knew what they were, and that was the goal. That was also on your promotional contract. Your promotional deal would be your minimums. Basically, the minimum amount of money you can get paid for a fight would rise when you won a major sanctioning body world championship of these sanctioning bodies. Not a continental version of them, not a regional version of them, not a subset version of them, just those 4 major sanctioning bodies, and it had to be the world championship. If you won those, your contract minimums would automatically multiply. You could not fight for less than a certain amount of money, and it was a lot more than what you were fighting, what your minimums had been before. You know, that was the deal I got anyway. You know, now I start to see like some real shyster deals where if you get into the top 10 or top 15, your contract extends. You know, your world title, if you won a world championship at that time, your minimums will go up, but also your contract would automatically extend, usually a couple of years. Now I see these extensions coming in with like a top 15 ranking, which is total BS, because you can get a top 15 ranking by making a phone call, you know? So automatically your promoter is able to just apply that option into your contract with an extension just by being able to make a phone call and say, hey, listen, I need my guy ranked, you know? And, you know, favors for favors. It's kind of shady in that way, you know? But especially, it was always weird in that way. But now, the fact that there's contract stipulations for extensions, for your contract to extend based on a top 10 or top 15 ranking, it makes him all the more shady because, like I said, the promoter can kind of just call in that option anytime he wants to. You know, if your contract is almost over and you're not ranked, oh, you know what, let me make a call. Let me tell this so-and-so sanctioning body, rank my guy in the top 15, and automatically his contract will extend. Even if you fall out of the rankings a month or two later, you know, it clicked in. You know, you clicked that option. So not really crazy about that either. But let's stick to the topic today about fighting for a world championship. For me personally, I think it was, you know, it's a special feeling when you get the call for a title shot. It's obviously special when you win it, but, you know, we all start boxing, and we dream to one day become that, that champion, that world champion. We know the sanctioning bodies, what they are. We watch these fights for the major sanctioning bodies on TV, and we hope and dream that one day we can be a part of such a showcase fight, so on a major network where, people are talking about us, and we're getting our pictures and our names in the press. And, where you gain that momentum in your career, where people start to demand that you fight for a championship, that you do fight for a championship, that, you just start, you turn pro, and, you have some notoriety if you've had a good amateur career. But as you work your way up the rankings, people start talking about you more and more and more. And there's, you sort of you build up a little bit of a demand, your face starts to appear in magazines, your face starts to appear in newspapers, your face starts to appear, in publications that people recognize, and they start to get to know you a little bit. Maybe you don't have the full-blown fame, but you're starting to make your push, and people are starting to ask questions about you and wonder about you, and say, how far can this kid go? Because now I'm hearing about him. He's good enough to where he's making some noise. How far can he go? And then, of course, you may get that call to where you're fighting for the world championship, and all of a sudden, it's a special feeling. I can remember for me, I had just beaten Don Camarena on Friday Night Fights on ESPN2, and it was a fight on Friday Night Fights ESPN2 in February 2006. I can remember this, and I had a really good performance. And I had been coming off of a year and change where I had 2 hand surgeries. I had surgery in December 2004, and I had surgery again in August 2005. And I fought only once in in all of 2005 because my hands were so bad; they were constantly breaking, and my hands were sort of putting my whole career in jeopardy. And I could tell even from my team around me was starting to have doubts about not so much my talent, but about how far I could really go because I was so injury prone. And I remember after the surgery I had in August 2005, my hand felt different than it had the prior couple of surgeries I had in my career, including the one from the year before. I could see the healing. It felt a little bit better. It's funny. I used to test this out. I had the cast that I would get in my hand. The cast would go from here, right at my knuckle, all the way to about here. And the surgeries were either here or on my knuckle, right? Or here where the hand would break. And I can remember when I would have the cast on, my knuckle would protrude a little bit if I could close it just a little bit because there was a cast would go out to here, right? So I could close my hand up to here, and the cast would go to about here. So my knuckle could kind of stick out on this end. So I remember I would test out my hand like this, literally like this, just tap it. And I could tell inside the cast how the healing process was going on, just about how much pain I felt just from doing this. Because obviously if you feel the pain here, you're not going to be able to punch anything anytime soon, So I would test this out every once in a while, and I can remember constantly the surgeries I'd have, and I would do this, and I would feel pain, and I'd be like, and the whole time in the cast. And I can remember the surgery I had in December 2004, as it came about healing, and it was almost time to come out of the cast. Naturally, you're not punching anything right away out of the cast, but you should be feeling a little better, and I wasn't, And so when I broke the hand again in August 2005, I had surgery again. And after that surgery, I can remember being in the cast for a few weeks and just touching, and it felt better. And finally, I was feeling like, it wasn't as intense, the pain that I was feeling. And little by little, I came out of the cast. I went through the therapy, and I started training. And suddenly, I realized, you know what? My hand is actually better than it's been in years, man. I may be able to make a run here, make a push here. At this point, I was 20-0. But I do think that, I wouldn't say that it was wrong for maybe my team to start doubting me a little bit. I think anybody would have those questions. I don't think that's wrong for a fighter who's so injury prone, or an athlete in general who's injury prone. But for me, they gave me this Friday Night Fights main event, and I can remember they had options on my opponent as well, Don Camarena. And I felt like a piece of me sort of felt like maybe they were just seeing which direction I was going to go. And just in case I got beat, they would have options on this other fighter who was a good fighter. Camarena had a couple of good performances on Friday Night Fights as well. So I guess they were seeing it, if I could beat him, they'd push me. And if he beat me, they'd have options on him, and they'd push him towards something, But at this point, it was just time to sink or swim for me because, I was 20-0, and my hands were just becoming such a question mark in my career. And I can remember training for this fight and realizing, my hand is good. I'm actually going to be better at this fight than I have been in a while. Like, people are going to get really, really surprised and shocked. Like, they haven't seen me this fast and this good in a while. And I could remember going through the training camp and feeling that. And the Camarena fight came, and I've passed it with flying colors. I let my hands go. I was very, very fast that night. It was very, very sharp. And, it ended up being that, a great performance for me. I had a lot of people talking about me. And now I was 21-0. But, of course, you had one fight with no hand injuries. But, you still had the reputation. So I think my promoter at the time felt like, okay, let's just put him in a sink or swim fight. That's it. Let's just put him, let's try to cash in on him or maybe cash out on him because we don't know how long his hands are going to heal. And again, I do not think this was a bad idea from my promoter at the time. I think anybody who has invested in me at this point has to just kind of see, hey, listen, this kid is so injury prone. We might as well take a chance on him now. Maybe it's a little sooner than we expected, but you know what? You got to kind of throw the dice right now. His career has just been so injury prone that we got to take a chance. Otherwise, we risk him hurting his hands in a nothing fight, and then we're back to square one, and we haven't cashed in on him at all. So they made the Cotto fight. And I remember for me thinking, getting the call. It was early March. I fought Camarena in early February. A month later, early March, I got a call. And I was told that, they were thinking they were going to make the Cotto fight. Actually, it was late February. They were thinking they were going to make the Cotto fight. And I was, super excited. I couldn't believe it, because Cotto had the WBO Super Lightweight World Championship. So for me, it's a dream come true. It's a major sanctioning body world championship opportunity. I've been waiting for years for this call. I started boxing in June 97. Here we are in February 2006. And I get a call that I'm fighting for the championship of the world. I mean, for me, it was just, it was a great phone call. I was just jumping up and down inside. I tried to stay calm while I was on the phone, but inside I was so excited, And they told me that I was going to go to Puerto Rico. They were going to send me and my team to Puerto Rico to watch the Cotto versus Gianluca Branco fight. Ironically, another Italian, but Branco is actually Italian from Italy. And if Cotto would win that fight, that they would make me and Cotto for the Puerto Rican the eve of the Puerto Rican Day Parade in New York City, which Cotto was starting to build up a reputation to fight every year on the eve of the Puerto Rican Day Parade. And they were going to make that fight in June. So I was like, okay, and I'm thinking in my head, hey, if Branco beats Cotto for the title, it could be an all-Italian showdown. You know what? That would be pretty cool too. But either way, Cotto was looking really scary at that point. So I kind of figured Cotto would win the fight. But and plus it was in Puerto Rico. But hey, man, we took a trip down to Puerto Rico. It was me and my team. We had some fun for a few days. And, I remember my best friend Peter Cars. You guys might know him. He got the worst sunburn. He drank a little too much, and he went to lay down by the poolside, and he just passed out poolside, and the sun burned him like a lobster. He was burnt to a crisp. He was absolutely burnt to a crisp. He was so red. It was, probably the worst kind of sun poisoning, I think. I still have pictures of him. He's full red, completely burned, and the only white part of him was where he was wearing his swim trunks, and he had socks on, so his feet were white, and everything else right at his ankles were red, crisp, burnt, and obviously where he had his swim trunks on was white, but nonetheless, it was a shockingly painful experience for him. He couldn't even move. Especially, I remember going to the fight with him, and he couldn't move at all. He couldn't even walk. He was like, everything hurt. But anyway, we went to the Cotto fight. It's funny, HBO actually hired me for the translation of the corner for Gianluca Branco because Gianluca Branco's corner spoke Italian. They paid me $500. I never cashed the check. I still have it somewhere. I just thought it was cool that I got paid for something else besides boxing because in my life I was good at nothing else but fighting. So I somewhere along the line, I still have that $500 check that HBO gave me for translating the Cotto, the Gianluca Branco corner in that fight. Cotto wins. He stops Gianluca Branco, and they announced that it's going to be me and Cotto in June. At the same post-fight press conference for Cotto, they announced me and Cotto was going to be made for June on the eve of the Puerto Rican Day Parade. And that was it. I was flying home, super excited, butterflies in my stomach, just super excited. I can remember they made James Toney versus Hassan Rahman, Top Rank did in Atlantic City, and they brought my team down to Atlantic City, I think a week or two later, and they wanted me to do a photo shoot with for the promo stuff for me versus Cotto, the promo pictures for me versus Cotto. This promo picture wound up on magazine covers and just articles and posters in general, And that's it. Now you're on your way. We had a training camp. And the feeling the whole time was, I knew it was going to be a tough fight, but the feeling the whole time for me was, just being super excited that I'm fighting for the championship of the world. I was just already, daydreaming in my mind every single day. The training camp was hard, but in my mind, it was, I just I couldn't believe that I had come this far in my life and I was here, and obviously, your goal is to win the title and defend it, but I just couldn't believe that, I was going to get to be on the world stage, and, I'm a high school dropout. I come from a family that was broken when I was a kid, and just the things that I overcame myself from a personal standpoint. I felt like it was surreal that I got myself into this position, and I think that I speak for anybody who gets that title shot for the first time, because I think that first title shot is the most important one, because it's you'll feel things emotionally that you never felt before. For fighters that start to win repeat world championships, I think it starts to become about money. It starts to become about even legacy and whatnot. But that first world championship, when you're still in your humble best, you're still in your dreaming best, you're still in that position where everything is in front of you and you just want to get there so badly. But of course, you're very confident that you're going to get there, but you're really never quite sure, because so many things could happen that could become roadblocks on your way to the title. There has been a lot of good fighters that I've seen that have never won world championships. So you don't know for sure until you win one for sure. But when you get the shot, especially the first one, it's all your life's work is suddenly thrust right in front of you, and in the matter of a few months of a training camp and a fight, you have everything that's valuable to you, everything you've been working for is right there in front of you, So for me, it was exciting. The press conferences were exciting. The promo was exciting. Even the training camp was so hard, but it was really exciting. The weigh-in was fun, and of course, fight night, which obviously wasn't so fun because I lost, but it was still, to be part of that huge promotion, to be part of that huge event. I still got to say, I fought in front of a packed Madison Square Garden. And I can remember watching Prince Naseem Hamed versus Kevin Kelly in 1997. And when I went to watch the fight, it was my first live boxing event I ever attended. And I remember leaving the building that night in Madison Square Garden and telling myself, I've got to feel this. What I just saw, Hamed had this crowd going crazy, and it was a terrific fight. Kelly dropped him 3 times. Hamed dropped Kelly 3 times. Eventually, it only lasted 4 rounds. It was an amazing fight. For anybody that hasn't seen it, go to YouTube right now and watch Hamed versus Kevin Kelly. It's one of the best fights you'll see. And it was my first experience at a live fight. So just think of the effect it had on me. And when I remember leaving Madison Square Garden that night as a freshly turned 17-year-old, I had turned 17 the month before, and just being determined that I had to feel this one day. What I just saw, I had to feel that one day. So that was December 1997 in a rowdy Madison Square Garden, and you fast forward to June 2006, I'm in a rowdy Madison Square Garden fighting Miguel Cotto for the championship of the world in that same kind of atmosphere. What I had promised myself I would feel on that December night in 1997, I was getting to in June 2006. So it was, a long time coming, but at the same time, again, your life's work, your dreams, your hopes, your determinations, it was there. So a lot of emotional feelings were going through me as I was preparing for this fight, and as I walked to the ring and prepared to fight this fight. A lot of differences. First thing, when I got inside the ring was jam-packed. It was a small ring, but I didn't realize that until everybody got out of the ring. I didn't realize how small it was until everybody got out of the ring, because it was so packed inside the ring. When I got in the ring, usually in my whole career, I would kind of circle the ring and start warming up, just keep my body warm inside the ring. But this fight, I guess the ring was small. Obviously, I found out once everybody left the ring. But in that moment, when I got in the ring, it was so full. There was so many people in the ring, I couldn't even really warm up. I had to kind of walk around a bunch of people. And that was my first experience where I was like, wow, this is different than any other fight I've had. Usually I just get in the ring and I can kind of walk as I please until the fight starts, right? And this fight is the ring is so jam-packed that I don't have a lot of space to move around. I kind of just got to hang out in my corner until the fight starts, until everybody gets out of the ring, which eventually they did. Another thing was, right before the opening bell, you go to touch gloves, you go back to your corner, and I can remember, we're about to go. Steve Smoger is checking with the judges, see if they're ready, the timekeeper's ready. He's about to signal the first bell. And one last thing that stuck out of my mind when I was waiting for the bell to ring, it was just me, Smoger, and Miguel Cotto inside the ring. The the flight flashes. At that time, it's not like today where you have iPhones and camera phones on your phone where you can just take pictures. At that time, you had to bring the little digital camera, which at that time, the digital cameras were actually modern because right before that, only a few years before that, you still had to get film inside your camera, So there was a lot of digital cameras going off, and I could see the light flashes. And I remember looking up into the crowd, looking across the ring at Cotto, who was facing the crowd. He had his back to me. He would at that time, he would not face you until the bell rang, and then he would turn around and start fighting you. So his back was to me, and I can remember just looking over into the crowd. So I'm not making eye contact with him because he's looking the opposite way as I'm waiting for the bell. So I'm just looking all over the crowd. My eyes are just gazing all over the crowd. And I kind of got lost in the moment, and then the bell rang. I'm like, oh, we got to fight, and because I just saw all these camera flashes going off all over the arena. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, I've arrived, this is the moment, this is what I always wanted to be. This is what I always worked hard to get to. And the moment I can't, this moment is here. And the bell rings, and it's like, I guess maybe, I don't want to make excuses. Maybe that's why I got off to a slow start in the first round or two. Like, I just kind of lost focus for a second, and then the bell rings, and we got to start fighting. In the end, you guys know what happened. We've talked about this a million times. The fight goes 12 rounds, yada, yada, yada. But, I'm disappointed, but I've shown myself that I'm capable of hanging on the world stage. But I didn't win the title, so I still have that emptiness in my stomach, in my heart, where it's like, oh, you want to become a world championship. I've experienced the world championship promotion. I've experienced the world championship feeling of being part of the whole entertainment part of that. But I haven't won the world championship. So there's a piece of me that's still empty, So a year later, in the next year, I had to recover. I had a broken orbital bone. I had to have surgery. It was a rough fight for me. 7 months later, I fight Edner Cherry on HBO Boxing After Dark. That's one of the positive things that came out of that performance was that the major networks wanted me on their network now. I didn't have to work my way back up. Because of the way I fought that fight, HBO wanted me right back in, and they gave me a main event on HBO Boxing After Dark the next February against Edner Cherry, which I won. And so that automatically catapulted me right back to another title shot. And I got the call, and they told me I was going to fight Lovemore N'dou for the IBF Super Lightweight World Championship. Now, the story behind this one is I was actually told that originally I was going to fight Ricardo Torres for the WBO light welterweight title. Ricardo Torres had also just won the title a few months earlier, the title that Miguel Cotto had vacated when he moved up to welterweight. And I liked that Ricardo Torres fight for myself, honestly. Torres was a monster puncher. He was a big puncher, but I felt like he had two left feet. And I felt like with my footwork, he was never going to touch me, It wasn't like Cotto, who was a heavy puncher, but he also had very good technique. I felt like Torres' technique was very poor, but he was a major, major puncher. And so I felt like I felt like I had a good enough chin, but I also felt like, I could beat him up while he was going to be looking for one major shot. I felt like I could tee off on him a lot more. I liked my chances in the Torres fight, and it was being talked about with me, plus my promoter, DeBella Entertainment, had already worked with Top Rank for the fight with me with Cotto, so it seemed like an easy fight to be able to make. And then suddenly I get a call and say, yo, you're going to fight N'dou for the IBF welterweight title. And N'dou was a guy who had given a lot of guys trouble, but hadn't gotten a lot of recognition. He'd fought Junior Witter tooth and nail for the WBC light welterweight title and lost. He'd fought Sean Bay Mitchell for the WBA light welterweight title and got robbed. I mean, everybody who saw that fight thought Lovemore beat Sean Bay Mitchell and got robbed. He was a real all-out pressure guy. And in those years, he was really a handful to deal with. Actually, he'd even fought Miguel Cotto for the WBC international title before Cotto won a world title and given Cotto the toughest fight of his career, the only other guy to go 12 rounds besides me with Cotto at that time. So Lovemore was actually a guy I wasn't really too keen on fighting. I was like, because I had already had a really tough fight with Miguel, and I was like, oh man, I'm like, I don't want to go through another hellacious fight like this. I had seen Lovemore against Miguel Cotto, and I'd seen the kind of hellacious fight it was, and I had already been part of a hellacious fight with Miguel, and I basically, in my mind, I looked at Lovemore like I looked at Cotto, like, oh man, I got to go through another night like this. If I want to be world championship, I'm going to have to go through another night like this, another hellacious night where it's just not going to stop. It's going to be very difficult and it's not going to stop. It wasn't my first choice for a title shot. People might say, oh no, well, Torres was a big puncher. I mean, he would have knocked you out. I didn't think so. I didn't think Torres had the consistency to beat me. I thought at that time I feared consistency more than power. Cotto had consistency and power. Ricardo Torres had power, but he didn't have consistency. He didn't have the technique or the footwork to make the fight consistently difficult for me. I felt like I had more consistency than him with my speed and my boxing ability. Lovemore had the consistency. He didn't have the punching power of Cotto. He wasn't a light puncher. He didn't have the punching power of Cotto, but his consistency was all out all the time. So, and that was more fearful for me, you know? So in getting another title shot for the second time in a year, I knew that if I lost again, I wouldn't get a title shot for a while. At least that was what was going through my mind. I said to myself, moral victories will be okay for the crowd and for the masses of the population, for the boxing fans, for the business, one time. But you eventually got to make good on that. You can't keep having moral victories and not real victories at this level, because otherwise you're just going to become known as a guy who can't hack it at this level. And I was really fearful of that, you know? So I wanted Torres instead of Lovemore N'dou. I got Lovemore N'dou. And N'dou was a guy with that all-out pressure that I just described. And so we went to camp and we started again. We started the promotion. We were getting ready for the training. And I basically looked at it in my mind like, okay, this is my dream again. You know, my world championship dream. I have to win a world title. I know this is what I've always wanted, you know, and I can't let this slip away. This is what I started boxing for. And again, you go through the same emotional roller coaster, but now I got this pit in my stomach. Like, I lost last year. I cannot afford to lose this fight, you know? And so, you know, you're always supposed to be confident. And I was confident. Every day I would train and I was sharp. You know, ironically, I actually, I trained most of the time in New York for that fight with my padman, who actually was my padman since I started boxing. And when I started boxing, I had a trainer named Willie Badillo and a padman named Orlando Carrasquillo. Orlando was always my padman on and off throughout my whole career. And I stayed in New York for most of the training camp, you know, and I only went to Florida to train with Buddy McGirt maybe the last 2-3 weeks. And me and Orlando had a very good chemistry. We knew each other a long time. I always felt like Orlando could have been a very good trainer in boxing, but he was so soft-spoken and he was such a timid person that he never had the character traits to be a head trainer. But his knowledge was bar none. I mean, you ask guys like Zab Judah, because he used to work with Zab, he used to work with guys like Arturo Gatti and Pernell Whitaker, rest in peace. You can't ask those guys, obviously. But he used to work with a lot of the main events fighters at that time. Main events actually used to bring him to their camp in Virginia Beach, and he'd work with all their fighters. And Orlando was very, very sharp with the pads, and he was very, very knowledgeable. He actually taught me how to think a lot. And I think a lot of the ways I'm able to commentate today is because of the knowledge I gained, because he would explain things to you so cerebrally, and he allowed me to really soak in why I was learning certain things. But he didn't have the personality to bring it out of himself the way that somebody like myself can, you know? So I kind of took his knowledge and absorbed his knowledge, and not only learned, but also because of my personality as a talkative person, I was able to transcend that knowledge and make it, I think it's a big basis for why I became such a good TV analyst and commentator later in my career. But anyway, at this point, Orlando Carrasquillo, a guy who's never going to get the notoriety he deserves, we worked with him in New York, and we went to Vero Beach to fine-tune things the last couple of weeks with Buddy McGirt. And I was really ready. I mean, I was determined. I knew that this was all or nothing now because I lost a title fight the year before. And again, can't stress enough, your dream is here. And I know if I lose this fight, I'm not going to get another title fight till I'm like 30. At that time, I'm 26. I lost a title fight with Cotto when I was 25. Now I'm 26, and I'm like, they're not going to just keep giving me random title shots because I look good in a loss. You know, eventually they're going to get sick of me coming up short. You know, I have to win this fight. And so again, I mean, you've got all the pressure on you, and that's part of fighting at this level. Part of getting the title shot. You've got all the pressure on you to, you know, excel to get there, you know, and then there's guys that they say, oh, they perform good in the gym, but they don't perform well under the lights. You know, when the stress and the pressure comes on, they don't perform like they do in the gym. I was known already as a very good gym fighter, but I had a big reputation in the gyms where I trained at, you know, throughout my whole life at that point. But now I had to prove it under the lights. I'd come up short against Cotto. I had to prove it under the lights that I could excel at this level, at the world-class level. And so the N'dou fight was everything to me, especially with the experience I had the year before with Cotto. And I think the experience I had the year before with Cotto really helped me out because in my mind, I played it like it was going to be just as tough as the Cotto fight. I played it where it was going to be just as stressful every second of every round. I was going to deal with a rugged, rough guy who was going to power punch. He was going to be dirty. He was going to be just make it as hellacious as possible. And Lovemore was that kind of guy. But I found out on fight night Lovemore didn't have the versatility Cotto had. I couldn't box with Cotto the way I wanted to because Cotto knew how to trap you and force you to fight his fight. Lovemore all-out pressured you. He was an all-out pressure guy, but he could be outboxed. And in a bigger ring, especially, the Mohegan Sun ring was a lot bigger than the Madison Square Garden ring I fought Cotto in, I was able to box him very, very well. I got super sharp in camp, as I said. I was determined. This was my lifelong dream. I was not going to let it slip away. As, again, fighters that are trying to win their first world championship, they'll tell you themselves, that same feeling I had the year before, it was there again, but now it was mixed with a little bit of fear and trepidation because I knew that if I don't win this one, people may never believe in me again, and I might never get a title shot for a long time, So it was mixed with all this fear, excitement, all this other stuff. I was super focused. And I got out there and I started boxing and I started realizing very early on that I'm way too sharp for this guy. He's pressuring me. He's pressing me. He's given everybody hell in his career thus far. Later on, Lovemore got dominated by a few other guys. He never got stopped in his career. He had a great chin, never got stopped in his whole career. But after me, Lovemore ended up losing some one-sided decisions. But at that point, he had never been dominated the way I dominated him on that night. He'd given everybody hell even when he came up short. And I started to pick him off, and I'm super sharp for him. I'm beating him to the punch. And I can remember two things in that night early on. Harold Letterman was the ringside scorer for HBO. Everybody remembers Harold Letterman. Rest in peace to him. He was a great ringside scorer, great personality for TV. And he was giving the scorecards for HBO. And I can remember just randomly, I didn't even do this on purpose, he gave the scorecards after 3 rounds and he gave the scorecards after 6 rounds. And I happened to be on his side of the ring, on the analyst side of the ring, both times as they were discussing the scorecards at that point in the round, at the beginning of the 4th round and at the beginning of the 7th round. And I can remember both times Letterman talking about, in his voice and his animated personality, saying that I was up 30-27 after 3 rounds. And after 6 rounds, 60-54, Paulie malignaggi. And I remember thinking to myself after 6 rounds, like, do not blow this, man. You're dominating this fight. Do not blow. Do not get caught with a stupid punch. Do not get yourself knocked out. Do not blow this. So now I'm like, I'm confident. I'm in my rhythm. I'm feeling it. I'm really feeling myself. My timing was great. My eyes were sharp. But at the same time, it's mixed in with this fear. Like, I've seen guys dominate fights and then just get caught with a shot and get knocked out. I was determined not to let it be me. But at the same time, anything could happen in a fight. And Buddy McGregor was very motivating in the corner. I always felt Buddy was a very good corner man. I disagree with a lot of his training technique for my style personally. But I always felt he was a very good corner man, and he always knew how to give good instructions in the corner. He had good eyes on the fly, basically in the middle of fight night. And I remember the things he was saying in the corner. They were applying. They were good. And as the fight's getting longer and longer, I just kept telling him, especially the last couple of rounds, I'm like, man, just get through these rounds, man. Just keep fighting your fight. Do not change. Because I didn't want to give Lovemore any reason to get confident either, because he was such an all-out pressure guy that if I gave him any confidence landing a couple of good combinations, landing a couple of good shots, he might up his game even more, because I had taken the confidence out of him. I didn't want him to gain him back, because at a certain point in the fight, he was just following me around the ring. All-out pressure, but just it was kind of the same rhythm, and I kind of had his rhythm and timing down really sharp at that point. So I didn't want him to gain any confidence and maybe have a reason to go into a higher gear, because he felt like he was able, maybe he felt like I was slowing down. So I didn't want to let him feel that. In round 9, I actually dropped him. I spun around off the ropes and I hit him with a 1-2, which staggered him. I pushed him down with the left hook. I don't really think the left hook was the cause of the knockdown, even though officially it will be. But if you see me, the 1-2 I hit him with right before that, his feet kind of do a little stagger. And then the hook that I follow up with puts him down. So that was really confidence building, because again, I got a guy with a great chin in front of me, and I was able to put him down. And obviously he got up, he was fine. And in my mind, all I remember thinking was, I wasn't even thinking about the knockout, because this guy's not a guy that goes away that easily. I always just remember thinking to myself, okay, that's a 2-point round, and I'm ahead now. So we continued the fight. And if you look, when the fight ends, I go down on my knees right away, because I know I've dominated the fight. There's no way I'm going to lose on the scorecard. So as soon as the last bell rings, I just put my gloves in front of my face, because I started crying. And I just, everything, like all the pressure I put myself my whole life, just in that moment, there's the emotions of that moment, all the pressure, all the stress that I put myself on myself in that whole life, just never having been good enough my whole life, no matter what I did. This is my personal experience, like that I never was good enough at anything I'd ever done in my life. And a lot of people didn't believe in me, and I'd climbed to this point, and people had started to believe in me, but then I'd come up short the year before, even though people were starting to believe in me. And I'd finally it was like the weight of the world just got taken off my shoulders in that moment. And I just kind of fell on my knees, and I didn't want to show everybody that I was crying. So I put my gloves in front of my face, and I just kind of like started breaking down emotionally. And I remember Peter Carr, my best friend, was the first one in the ring, tackles me, and then everybody just jumps on top of me. And the ironic thing about Peter Carr is he's the first one in the ring both times I won world championships. Years later with Sanctioning, when I stopped Vyacheslav Sanctioning, Peter Carr, I run to the ropes, I jump off the ropes, and who's inside the ring waiting for me? Peter Carr is just grabbing me, and I jumped in his arms, So Peter was always like a lightning bolt right in the ring when those fights ended. And in that fight, he tackled me. I remember my promoter Lou DiBella tackled me. Everybody was in the ring. It was happy, and the decision was sort of elementary. We knew we dominated the fight, and that was a big moment for me, and it alleviated a lot of pressure. And the ironic thing about that is it's great, but then when you're making that kind of money, when you win a world championship, and you find out the real dirty part of the business. You think the business is dirty at a lower level. You start to think like, oh, you're dealing with when you're dealing with high level money, that's when you get all the snakes come out, man. And so it really does kill the passion and enthusiasm you have for the business. I eventually lost that enthusiasm and passion I had for the sport of boxing, and I became like those fighters that are at the championship level for a while, and they just fighting for a good check. You're still working hard. You have a responsibility to entertain. You have a responsibility to do your best, to show up to work and do your job. I always felt that on a principle base that I was always that kind of fighter. On fight night, no matter what, I have to give the fans their money's worth and try to, do my due diligence, and there's no quitting in me. But until that point, you don't know that. The business is dirty. It's been a little bit dirty for you, but when you start fighting for that high level money, when you win a world championship and the money multiplies, you start seeing snakes everywhere, man. And that was what I didn't know was about to happen in front of me. I was super happy in that moment. That was the most happy moment of my boxing career, that first world championship. But what it did, what ignorance is bliss. What I don't know is that I'm about to see the most dirty side of the business. That now I'm entering that part of the business wherever there's a lot of money. Now, some people say boxing is dirty. It's not just boxing that's dirty. Listen, life is dirty in general in business, because whenever there's a business where there is a lot of money, snakes are slithering in the grass. And so once you reach the high level amount of money, you start to realize, you learn that this is where all the snakes reside. You sort of enter into a different playing field. You're in a different sandbox. You're playing in the sandbox where all the money is. And in that sandbox, the snakes hang out. There's not so many snakes in the other sandbox, But you only find that out once you reach that level. And that's what I would learn in the years, in the ensuing years after winning that world championship. But in that moment, that particular moment right there, it was a very special feeling. The first one is for me the most special. The Sanctioning fight later on was a very special moment too, because it was basically me against the world, and nobody thought I could do it, and I went to the other side of the world to win the title. I'll get into that another time, but it was a different kind of feeling there. But still, nonetheless, a major sanctioning body world championship is the goal, And you sometimes. You guys turn pro, and there's super prospects, and they're expected to get there, and they get there. You got like guys like Floyd Mayweather, who won more major sanctioning body world titles than we can even count to. He just had an excellent body of work and an excellent career. Some guys, they're not expected to get there at all, and many of those kind of guys definitely won't get there. But sometimes they do. I think of guys like a local guy in New York that was from my area on Long Island, a Puerto Rican fighter named Jake Rodriguez. He was a mechanic. He wasn't. He was a fighter. He'd taken a couple losses. Good, crafty fighter, southpaw. But I don't think anybody looked at him like he was going to win a world championship. And sure enough, he fit through the cracks. He made his way through, and he beat Charles Murray for the world championship. And he even defended it a few times against guys like Ray Oliveira and a few other guys. But eventually, Jake Rodriguez was the guy that Kasha Tszyu beat to start his reign of terror. Kasha Tszyu was a guy who ended up having an excellent boxing career. But his first world championship, he beat Jake Rodriguez for it. And Jake, after that, never reached those highs. I think he lost more than he won after he lost to Kasha Zhu. Like I said, Jake was mainly just a mechanic. So you've got these great stories that, you've got people that can kind of fit through the cracks and win these championships because they got determination, they've got the character, they've got the mental makeup to not take no for an answer, even if things are a little bit harder for them. I think you always have to have the mental makeup to win a world championship. It's a different kind of mental makeup. Even if you're one of the guys that everybody expects to get there, even if you have that kind of talent, you still got to go through the motions. You don't win world championships on paper. Not yet, anyway. If they could figure that out, they eventually will, because boxing is that kind of shady business. But right now, you still got to fight your way to the world championships, and you still got to physically win them no matter what is expected of you. And one thing I learned, that the press clippings don't win the championships for you. You can read your own press clippings and just feel good, but when you get in the ring and fight for that world championship, you still got to do the work. It's still the bearing of responsibility still is on you to go and perform on that night, because if you come up short, they're not going to go back and look at the press clippings and say, well, this guy was expected to win. Everybody thinks he's the next best thing since sliced bread. So, let's just give him the title. Listen, sometimes these guys do get robbed, don't get me wrong, but over the course of time, your body of work shows itself because you put in the work, you put in the time, you have the mental makeup, the mindset and the character to excel at that kind of level. And, there's guys that have fit through the cracks, like I said, like Jake Rodriguez. And then there's guys that, so much greatness was expected of them, and, they don't get there. They don't get there. Excellent fighters that, that you think for sure can't miss, will win world championships, and they don't get there for one reason or another. So it's not that easy to do. I think of somebody like Andre Durrell, who is one of the most talented fighters I've seen ever. Not just in my generation, for sure, he's the most talented guy. But I think Andre Durrell is one of the most talented guys ever. I think most people, when he was turning pro, would have probably told you he was more talented than even his brother, Anthony, who was a good fighter, an excellent fighter, and had won a couple world championships himself. But Andre, for me, was can't miss. He was insanely good. He won a bronze medal at the 2004 Olympics. He lost to Gennady Golovkin in the semifinals. So it's not like he lost to a slouch even at the Olympics. And when he turned pro, I thought he was can't miss. But, he came up a little short. He's still fighting. He's still a handful to deal with. He's older now, but he's never won a world championship. So these sanctioning body world championships, the major ones, the major ones, the ones, the primary version of them, you can't lie to yourself about them. You're going to get there. You're going to get there. If you're not going to get there, it's not going to be. You need a special kind of mindset, a special kind of mental makeup, and you need to be a special person to win them, because the road there is not easy, and actually winning them, dethroning the champions also is not easy. And then, of course, holding on to them is difficult as well, because now you're fighting guys that many times are going through the same emotional buildup that you were going through when you were fighting for that championship, So it's a complicated thing, but it's also a part of what makes the ride special. It's part of what makes the journey special. And getting to enjoy it is great, but also getting to enjoy it with you guys, with the crowds, with the emotions that is behind great crowds and great packed arenas. That's one of the things that I also am so thankful that I was able to enjoy is, fighting in front of some of the most famous arenas in the world, some of the biggest arenas in the world, because I was able to reach these levels of getting to these world championships, So it's experiences on top of experiences. I hold them dearly to me, and I'm happy to share them with you. And just from the perspective of a fighter, I think, you guys can sort of get a little bit of a feeling of what we go through as fighters when we're in these situations, because it's not always easy. Sometimes, you're watching the fights with your friends and it's quick. It's you're quick to judge. And don't get me wrong, we're all guilty of this. We have a couple of drinks, we're hanging out with our friends, and we easy to make fun of that guy or say that guy just wasn't good enough. I can remember, being lonely in the hospital after I lost to Miguel Cotto. I went to the hospital because I had the broken orbital bone, and just kind of just being in the room by myself. And my girlfriend at the time came in, and she was hugging me and just thinking to myself, man, it's really all there is. It's like there's not a lot of people when you're on the losing side of a major fight. And I can remember my friends and my family trying to leave the arena after telling me that they were dealing with a lot of things that people were telling them, like a lot of negative things that people were telling them. But also, some things were being said that made me feel better. A lot of people talking trash, sure, But a lot of people were also saying good things. I can remember Louis Collazo, who also would later on become a world champion and came up with me in New York. He came to see me at the hospital. We were just kind of talking about things because he lost a controversial fight to Ricky Hatton the month before, and now I'd lost to Cotto. And we were in the same generation, and we were, trying to become world champions from New York for our generation. We were the latest generation, and we'd come up a little short in our battles in the past month, but eventually we'd both wind up becoming world champions. We were just he was there kind of supporting me. I can remember it was something really cool. Freddie Prinze Jr. was a famous actor at that time. Now he hasn't done a movie in a while. His father also was very famous. I don't know much about his father, but Freddie Prinze Jr., I didn't know this. His mom was Puerto Rican, or maybe his father was Puerto Rican. One of his parents was definitely Puerto Rican. He was at the arena that night. He was at the Garden cheering for Miguel Cotto, and he found my brother. And the only reason he found my brother is because my brother was wearing a Team Malignaggi jacket. And Freddie Prinze Jr. went up to him and he goes, "Yo, can you let Paulie know something?" And my brother's like, "Sure." He goes, "I came here tonight a Miguel Cotto fan, but I'm also leaving a Paulie Malignaggi fan tonight. Just let him know that." And when my brother told me that at the hospital, it made the effort that much better. Listen, it's not going to be as good as having won the world championship. Luckily, a year later, I was able to do that. But in that moment, it really made me feel a lot better, because at the time, Freddie Prinze Jr. was a major, major actor. He'd done a lot of big, big movies. Now he's not been in a big movie in a while. I don't even know if he's still acting, if he's just kind of chilling because his body of work was so good from back then. But I don't know if he realized how comforting that was for me. To have heard that he said that, because at that point I was by myself, I was in pain, and I wasn't sure if people even appreciated all the effort that I gave. I just thought I came up short, and this is not good enough, and I felt like everybody thought like me. That's just not good enough, but I later found out, that people did appreciate the effort. Obviously, years later, I'm happy with the effort that I went through. I'm happy with that experience, because even though I came up short, it set the building block for my character and for my boxing for the rest of my career. And I was able to win world championships based on having had that experience, I feel, So, that's things that, sometimes that's pretty much the story of getting the championship shot. You got to deal with the politics. We've dealt with all of this as well. Sometimes world sanctioning body fighters, the fighters get in the rankings, and suddenly you feel like, well, maybe how's this guy getting to skip the line of getting a championship fight over this guy? And boxing is a business. Sometimes you may have a more deserving fighter from the way he fights getting a championship shot, but this guy might sell more. This guy is with a more powerful promoter. Unfortunately, politics are part of life, and they're certainly part of the business as well, But nonetheless, however you get there, you still got to perform on fight night. Otherwise, you will not be able to have that experience of being able to call yourself a world champion. And whether you are a guy who won so many of them and we lost count like Floyd Mayweather, or whether you're a guy who had them for a couple defenses and kind of went back into obscurity, who was an obscure guy like Jake Rodriguez, you can still call yourself a guy who's won a world championship, and guys that saw you perform will know to experience that. And also guys that have, guys who are in the same brotherhood, the guys who have won championships, we appreciate each other because we know exactly what the journey is. We went through the journey. We know exactly what the journey is. And so, we're happy to give you guys the experiences of watching us. We're happy that you guys are there watching us, whether it's positive feedback or negative feedback. But I hope I allowed you guys to get into the mindset of what it's like to fight for a major sanctioning body world championship as a fighter and getting that title shot. Until next time, guys, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys next time on Paulie TV.